As he said, my name is Jeff Connor. I'm currently the Chief Deputy Sheriff of the Sheriff's Department, and I'm also the Chief Deputy Commander of the Major Case Squad. And what that means is I'm over the Illinois side of the Major Case Squad. So we've got a PowerPoint presentation that we do just to give you a little bit of the history of the Major Case Squad, and then we'll talk a little bit as we go through there. So if you don't mind seeing slides, we'll go through there. The history of the Major Case Squad actually started in 1964 with the Kansas City Metro Squad, and from there it was mainly because it was an urban area, and St. Louis ended up having the same situation that Kansas City did, where it crossed two state lines, and then you had a high density of population, and then a lot of municipalities that were really smaller departments that had to deal with the crime that comes with a large city. So we became operational May 1st, 1965. So we recently celebrated our 50th anniversary of the Major Case Squad. 50 years of solving crimes. That's all the Major Case Squad does, is certain types of crimes, which we'll get into. And the Illinois side started off with the St. Clair County Sheriff's Department, Madison County Sheriff's Office, Belleville, and O'Fallon. This was back in 1965, and then it has morphed into what we have today. We have over 525 investigators that are part of this squad. Currently in Illinois, St. Clair, Monroe, Madison, Bond, Macoupin, Clinton, Jersey, and Randolph County are all have representation of the squad. We have 34 municipal agencies, and all of these sheriff's departments are part of the squad. In St. Louis, you get St. Louis City, but the thing is, St. Louis City, they don't activate the Major Case Squad when they have a homicide within their city. So even though they had over 203 homicides last year, not one time did St. Louis City activate the Major Case Squad. But what they do is they put members of their department on the squad, and then we can use their resources, and we can also use those investigators to help with crimes. The St. Louis City and St. Louis County both have their own homicide unit. And because of that, you'll never see either one of those two agencies activate the Major Case Squad. But their resources are very prevalent in the activations. And on the same way, if you go back to Illinois, Illinois State Police is a contributor of the Major Case Squad, but they never activate the Major Case Squad because they have their own homicide unit. On the concept, what we try to do is we pool the manpower, we pool our resources, and what better way to do that than to get, if we had a situation with a business decision, what better place than to come to the Rotary? I saw a chiropractor, I saw a minister. You've got so many different people who have so many different resources. And the Major Case Squad kind of works that same way, where the chief here, whenever he called me back in June, and we activated the Major Case Squad, if he had to do that on his own, his department, very limited resources because of the size and the budget of their department. So when you reach out, and we'll show you here in a little bit of how big this, we can become a task force real quick. You've got a lot of resources. Right away, by making that phone call, by getting the Sheriff's Department involved, he has every resource the Sheriff's Department has. Every resource that every department that responds has. So the ability to conduct an intensified investigation are limited to crimes of violence. Now, some of those crimes that are limited, that we put in our bylaws, are homicides, rapes, sexual assaults, kidnappings, violent armed robberies, and any other crime deemed necessary. I will tell you this, I've been a member of the Major Case Squad since 1990. And, I've only seen homicides be investigated. I've seen maybe 2 attempted murders where they thought the person was going to die and they activated. And then recently, recent as probably 3 years ago, I received a call from the state's attorney of St. Clair County, Brendan Kelly. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Mr. Kelly. He called me and had his assistant on the phone. And he says, Jeff, I got a unique situation. I'd like to activate the Major Case Squad. And my thought, first of all, is the state's attorneys don't activate. It's the police department. And he said, what I've got is I've got a church that was robbed at gunpoint in East St. Louis. And there was over 50 parishioners in that church. And I believe there was 4 suspects that came in with masks, long rifles, and they robbed each individual in that church. And he says, East St. Louis cannot do this. State police is too busy working the homicides. I think it would be a good thing for the major case squad. I'm like, well, Brendan, give me a few minutes. I got to read up on this to see if it meets our bylaws. I'll make some phone calls on that. And before I hung up, they started giving me a 20-minute speech of why we should activate. And I told them, I feel like I just listened to the closing argument of a homicide right here, because you've actually convinced me that we need to do this. So we made the decision and we did it. We solved the crime, but not only that crime, we solved multiple crimes that were associated with these individuals. That was a very unique situation that normally isn't the focus of the major case squad. Normally the focus is what is believed to be a homicide. And I say believed to be. There are sometimes, I worked a case many years ago in Collinsville, a 15-year-old boy was missing and he was found in a creek bed, and we worked that as a homicide until we determined that his death was other than homicidal means, that it was more of an exposure case. So, we will work those if it's an apparent homicide. What is the criteria to be a member? Number 1, 5 years full-time law enforcement experience, plus 2 of those years being in investigations. That is what we put on the paper that we need. We also put that you have to be recommended by your chief or your sheriff. So a detective can't call me and say, hey, I want to be on the squad. It doesn't work that way. You got to come through your chief, because they have to dedicate you, be able to dedicate you in your time whenever we need you. And as you can see, when you have this minimum experience going into a task force, everyone who's on that task force is what we would call a seasoned investigator. They've got experience doing this. This isn't a person who graduates the academy at 21 years old and we put them working a homicide. We don't work that way. These are all seasoned investigators. We have a command structure. The squad itself has a chairman of the board of directors. The board of directors is every sheriff and every county representative is on it. Then they have a number of police chiefs. They have civilian members on it. They have an executive director, a commander who is over both sides of the river. His name is Dan DeCarly. He's a captain with Ferguson. And then 2 chief deputy commanders. I'm over Illinois, and then we have another one that's over in Missouri. We have, it breaks down into report officers and personnel officers. Right here, Lieutenant Halbrooks is one of the personnel officers in Illinois. Now, the personnel officer, what happens? Chief calls me, wants to activate the major case squad. I debrief him. What do you have? Give me a little bit about it. Usually I can make a decision on the phone right away, but I'll call the commander just to make sure that he knows what's happened, and I'll give him my recommendation. And if they activate, depending on where the homicide is, my next call is to Lieutenant Halbrooks. Say, we're activating the major case squad. I need you to form a team. He then starts his magic of contacting all these agencies in Illinois, if it's an Illinois case, and he starts comprising a team. That team, we need a commander, we need a supervisor, and then we need all the investigators. But that falls on the personnel officer. If it's in St. Clair County, then we have Captain Kurt Bergman from O'Fallon. He will be that person that develops that team. If it's outside of those 2 counties, then we just kind of pick who's the closest. Like if it's Macoupin County, we would do that. If it's Monroe County, then St. Clair County would do that. Activation criteria. First, the department that has the body has to be a member of the agency. It must be requested within 4 hours of discovery of the crime. The reason we do that, we don't want, I'll just say East Dalton, to investigate it for 2 weeks and then call me and say, hey, we can't solve this crime, can you guys come in and help us? That's not the design of this unit. The design is to take it over as swiftly as possible. So, we also like to know that there's no known suspect. We don't go in whenever A guy calls 911, says, I just shot my wife, she's in the back bedroom, she's dead. And you go there and there he is, there's a gun. Those aren't the type of cases the major case squad works. Our type of cases are where you find a person who's been deceased in their home for several days. You find an 85-year-old grandmother who's been raped and beaten, that you don't know who it is. Those are the type of cases that need that extra help. And those are the type of cases that we come in and work. We prefer that the body has not been removed from the scene, and we also have certain board-approved crime scene services that we request to process the crime scene. So we get the okay, and then the activation starts. This activation typically gets us between 15 and 20 experienced and highly trained investigators within 2 hours of the investigation. So when the chief called me at 4 o'clock that day, by 6 o'clock we had probably 20 investigators at East Alton PD. I'm here to help. What can I do? But the thing is picture everybody in here being a chief of a different department in the Madison, in this region, Madison County, St. Clair County, Monroe County. Everyone here is a chief of a different department. When Joe calls all these departments, then it's up to the chief or whoever that if they can send somebody, then you will send a detective from your department. You'll send one from your department. So when we have 20, it's not 20 investigators from the same department. It's spread out amongst the region. Work on the clock. We work until there's nothing more to do. And I'm talking about like that first day at 4 o'clock. They may work till 4 in the morning and go home and get a couple hours sleep and come back. Very rarely do we get a call out at 8 in the morning. Joe will tell you this, it doesn't happen. It's usually at 10 o'clock is the worst time to get a call out. Because you've gone all day, you're ready to go to bed, and boom. And now you're going to work all through that night, possibly the next day. I've worked a lot of these cases since 1990, and the longest that I've personally have worked, I've had about 3 cases like this. It was in the 50 to 55 hour range straight. So picture getting up today on Thursday and going to bed Saturday night. That is the type. And you get to the point where you cannot think. You have to get some rest. And what we'll do is we'll start, when you get into a situation like that, we'll start saying, okay, you 12, you go home and get some rest, and then in 3 hours you go home and get some rest. You have to start staggering that to get some rest. It can't, 5 to 7 days, when the chief called me right away, we knew we had a 5-day call out. I didn't have to make any calls, he didn't have to make any calls. This is activated for 5 days. Anything beyond that, then it would be up to the commander to get a hold of me and ask for an extension. And if we feel there's enough to extend, we will. Did we extend this one?
No.
I thought it was like 5 days and we were. At the conclusion of the 5 days, 6 days, whatever it is, whether or not it's solved, we turn the case back over to that department. So we just come in, we saturate the investigation, we document it, we have our own records management system, we document all of our reports, everything, and then at the conclusion, we hand them a package report that's got everything in there that every investigator did during that report. Results, you can see here's a few years on both sides. Activations are up and down, up and down. And in 2017, we just finished in Illinois with 13 activations. This was our highest number that we've had, just on the Illinois side, plus 8 in Missouri. Of those 13, we had 7 arrests and 6 remain open. So a case that remained open, such as the East Alton case, we're complete with it, but they continue to work it. It doesn't mean that this case won't be solved. It's just during that 5 days, we didn't have enough evidence to substantiate an arrest warrant for somebody for that homicide. Currently, since 1965, there's been 655 activations, and we have a clearance rate of around 85%. For those who don't know, that's a very high clearance rate, and we're very proud of that. I went to DC for a week a few years ago to tour their homicide unit, and they touted a 60% clearance rate. And they were ecstatic about that. And then I asked him, I go, how long has this been? And I think he said back since 1965, we have statistics. To give you an idea of a 60% clearance rate, look at it this way. They had also had 10,000 homicides in those times, and they cleared 6,000, which means there's 4,000 unsolved homicides in DC alone from that time period. So we're very proud of the 85% that we can do, and we really put it on the dedication of the men and women, and also the concept of saturating this case with 15, 20 investigators. Financial responsibilities. The host agency, we'll just stick with East Alton, they are not responsible for any of those 20 investigator salaries. He's responsible for his salaries, his officers, and usually the host agency encumbers a few more officers working that case. Like Madison County may send 1 or 2, well, he may have 3 or 4 that are working, helping out. They don't pay for our salaries. We have to pay for the officer salaries that we send. We pay for all their overtime and anything that takes place. The host agency is responsible for the meals for the investigators, the gasoline of emergency maintenance, the lodging if we have to go. I've worked many cases where I've sent people to Florida, Michigan, different places. And the host agency is responsible for any out-of-travel expenses. We have had helicopters being used. We've used airplanes for surveillance. And if there's a cost to that, it is this department's responsibility. The expenses for database searches is becoming more and more prevalent. When we do a search warrant, sometimes if there's not an exigent circumstance, there may be a $25, $50, $100, $200 fee to get that information. And that falls on the department that's activated. And that's where, as business owners, you can step in to help the police department, whether it be the meals. They're to tell you, that's a big cost. When you have 20 investigators and you're feeding them for 5 days straight, a couple meals a day, that adds up very quick. And I don't know what his cost is, but I would say it was probably a couple $1,000 just in meals alone. So as a business owner, if you can help them, that's a time when you can help your own agent, your own community by helping out with that. The benefits, once again, it's the saturation investigation. Dedicating that many people, large volume of leads. We cover a lot of ground during that first 24, 48 hours, a lot of ground. I worked a case that we'll just highlight real quick. In 2009, it was a Chris Coleman triple homicide in Columbia. And I was the commander of that. I got called at 7 a.m. 8 a.m. I was there. By 9 a.m. we had detectives all over. We ended up with almost 30 investigators. It's a very high profile case. And one of the first leads was to shut down the trash service. It just happened that Tuesday, May 5th, 2009, was trash day for that subdivision. That's a lot of places where a suspect can ditch evidence. So the first thing we did, cut down the trash service. Not today, we'll do it tomorrow. And then we had to search every trash can in that whole subdivision. Columbia could not have done that by themselves, but we had the ability to do that. At the same time, going to every business anywhere in our area and telling them, preserve your video. We need your video because we don't know what we're going to need later on. So it's a big benefit for that. The networking, resources, experience, training we touched on. Training. How do you train? The major case what actually trains our investigators. We have an annual training which is held in March. We also send them to different conferences. We've been in Dallas, been to going to Vegas this year for a week-long conference. Twisted my arm to go there, but I guess I will. We just go wherever there's an organization called IHIA. It's the International Homicide Investigators Association, and we send 20 to 30 investigators there every year for a week-long conference. And then we send some to the Missouri Highway Patrol in the fall. Funding. Major Case Squad is not a governmental agency. They receive no tax support. It's strictly on fundraising, donations. We have a golf tournament the first Friday of June. We will raise nearly $50,000 to $60,000 for this one-day event. We have a lot of corporate sponsors, and then we use that money to help send the investigators to a different training. We rely a lot on the community. We have a lot of corporate sponsors and people throughout the year that will help us. Costs about $100,000 a year just in equipment. We have an executive director salary, which is a very minimal salary, and he just coordinates the training and that. Other than that, it's just the cost of having equipment and the software and the upgrade and the maintenance fees on those items. Just a few headlines. Some of these may look familiar to you. There's one that was a former sheriff here commanded. And these just usually when you see the major case squad, it usually makes the news. This is a really sad case. This was a 11-year-old girl, Bosnian girl by the name of Selma Dekanovic, that went missing in St. Louis, and later that evening at Horseshoe Lake, just outside of Granite City, a fisherman found her body in the lake, and we ended up working that. And David Ray Martin is in prison now, and will be for the rest of his life for raping and shooting this 11-year-old girl. Amy Bloomberg from O'Fallon, Illinois. December 31st, 1999, that case was worked hard, and they could not solve it, and they turned it back over to O'Fallon, and a few years later, leads broke, and what was so nice about it is that once they found their suspect, they were able to match what the investigation did, and everything fit together. They were able to cover a lot of ground of some things that they knew, and that helped them 4 or 5 years later, whenever they actually found the suspect, and was able to charge him. He went to trial and was convicted. More local, we had a Bethalto woman, Paula Wyman, that went missing back in 2005. I don't know if anybody remembers this. She was at a Cardinal game and went missing, and I actually commanded this case. Belleville found her body a few days later. She had been shot in the head, and with the major case squad, we were able to solidify convictions on that. And what you see there, that little laptop, is a Walmart surveillance. Once again, it's the concept. Having so many people, we were able to ascertain this very quickly. We found her car in North St. Louis. It had already been towed before her body was found. We went back out. I sent 6 investigators out there, searched that whole area. The car smelled of a chemical. They found an empty container of ammonia that was in the lot in North St. Louis. And it smelled like ammonia, that whoever had did this had cleaned her car out. So we took this, we scanned it, we realized it was a Walmart brand. We knew where she had been found deceased. So we started an area around there, going by every Walmart. The very first Walmart, we scanned it. They said, we sold this on this date. Let's pull up the video. We pull up a video of 2 guys walking in, buying rubber gloves, a spray bottle, a bottle of ammonia. We get the parking lot video, and they're pulling up in the victim's car. That was because we had the resources to work quick. I remember putting that video on the news, and right away got a call from somebody in Indiana who was on their computer watching the news. Said, hey, that guy on that video says, I went to school with him. I said, I'm originally from the St. Louis area. I went to school with him. Boom, here comes another phone call confirming what this person says. And by the end of the day, we knew the work for him. Chris Coleman case, the 3 beautiful people there were brutally murdered by their father, Chris Coleman. May he rot in hell. Another local, this was a Belleville lady that was leaving bingo, gets carjacked. They beat her and burned her alive in her car. Recent, we had a case in the area. We had a body of a boy that was missing, a young man that was missing. He had purchased a car on Craigslist, and was later, we activated the major case squad when his body was found under a tractor trailer in St. Louis, and determined that he was killed there after he tried to sell this car right here. This is a Bethalto case where a body was dumped off at 255. This was in 2013. You see there are 22 investigators, 73 leads. This is the East St. Louis church robbery I talked about in 2013. shooting at a theater. A couple of years ago, 11-year-old boy playing basketball in Alton, drive-by took place, shot the kid in the back and killed him. Recently, Macoupin County found the bones that was later determined to be a missing person for 4 years. There is a suspect in that case. He hasn't been currently charged, but we're confident we know who that is. And there's some things pending.
This is your 2-minute warning.
All right, thank you. And this is probably the last slide. East Alton. This was the one that the chief called me on. Been recognized by multiple agencies throughout the nation. That's it.